All right, here we are for session 2 of the Garage Files, the Garage Recordings. It sounds like a Tom Waits album or something. Okay, this time we're going to talk about ideology and legitimation. Now, a lot of the questions I was trying to talk about, that metacognitive discussion post and news post that I was trying to get at, this is the key chapter for understanding what we're talking about. Now, let me... there's two things I want to do before I get started. Okay. The first is many humans, or maybe even most humans, want to have or expect that there's some sort of cosmic justice in the world. We can ascribe it to God. We can ascribe it to karma. Even if we don't believe in God or karma, we still really wish that the world was fair. And in many ways, the world isn't fair at all, right? And that leads me to the second one. When you hear about things in the world, about inequalities, let's see, how do we do this? All right, when you read about Mexican kids, or about those kids in Mexico who live their life in the garbage dump in Mexico City, right? There was a Facebook thing that went around about the garbage dump orchestra. When you hear about those kids, how is it fair in any sense that those kids live like that, and we get to live in the relative comfort and security of the United States, right? It's not fair, right? I got lucky and was born to my parents. Those kids got unlucky and were born to those parents, and they get to live in a garbage dump. An intro text I used a few sessions back had a picture of a little girl somewhere in the Middle East. I wish I remember where, but I don't. And I wish I had the picture for you, but I don't. It showed this little girl doing some, seriously, like, 6, 7, maybe 8 years old, doing some, funky, dirty work, breaking bricks with a hammer or something stupid, I don't remember. And the poor little kid has a baby doll there with her, right? Well, my girls, when they were 7 and 8 years old, they like to play with baby dolls. And how is it that my children at 7, 8 years old are lucky to have to do a chore, and this kid, because she's born in a different social environment, grows up with having to work at 7, 8, 9 years old, right? How is that right? I mean, those are some of the reasons that we turn to something like God, because it is so cosmically unfair. And we could go on and on about examples like that. I don't think we need to, because I think you probably understand what I'm getting at. How do we go to bed at night knowing we were just lucky? Now, there are some people who are willing to say, look, it was luck. I have no idea why I was this way, and they are unlucky. But at the very least, they weren't. At the very least, they got a shot. Who knows, right? But it takes a lot of acceptance of unfairness to be able to live with that. Most of the rest of us turn to something like karma or God or whatever to say, well, it's we don't really understand, but there's got to be a reason that these huge differences exist in people. All right, well, that's what this chapter is about. Now, we can't talk about the entire world, so the Pakistani example is out, and the Mexican garbage dump example is out, but there's still tremendous differences here in the United States. And if you paid attention to the last chapter where we talked about education, some of those differences are cemented in children long before those children are old enough to even know something's going on. By 10, 11 years old, values in place, cultures in place, an understanding of education is in place, And, those kids are still playing with baby dolls, right? So how is that fair? That's what this chapter is really about. So legitimacy and legitimation, just two definitions. So legitimacy is the definition I got out of the book: the willing acceptance of the prevailing institutional and stratification systems by most members of society. So we accept that society's stratification system exists, and for the most part we think it's fair. And legitimation is just the verb whereby that happens, right? Okay, so let's look at, this one has a lot of slides, but the nature of ideology. So ideology, the set of beliefs and values that rationalize a society's structure of power and privilege. How do you think the system works, right? That's why I was asking these questions about values, or asking you to be metacognitive. How do we think? Not just how do we think it works, but how do we think about thinking about how it works, right? This is what I was trying to get at with the metacognitive question. Let me think of a different way to say this. If I ask you what's going on with screw it. Maybe it'll be clear as we go through this. Just let me say that that's what I was trying to get at. Okay, so dominant ideologies. If there's a belief about how the system works, right, and an inherent acceptance that more or less that's the way it's supposed to work, right? That's the ideology. The dominant ideology is simply the dominant ideology, the ideology of most people, right? So if we go to find some sort of subgroup, of course they're going to have a different understanding of how the world works. That would be a subordinate ideology. But a dominant ideology is, what do most people think about the system, right? So for Marx, let's start with Marx. Recall we talked about in Marx we talked about ownership of the means of production. The means of production are the tools we use to produce the things we need in life as animals: food, shelter, water, clothing, sex. Sex is important, so we keep society going, right? How do we do all those things? And if we were cavemen, we do it one way. If we're tribalists in the jungle, we do it another way. If we're modern Americans, we do it this way, right? Okay. Now, a big part of the means of production is the means of producing culture. Culture is the ideas and beliefs that go along with the thing, right? So that includes creating religion. That includes creating the knowledge of how different things work. You don't need to know what plants you can eat and can't eat, because you're not a caveman wandering around looking for plants. You need to know the difference between a Windows computer and a Mac computer, because in today's world that's going to influence. If you get a job and the company uses this kind of computer, you're toast, right? That would fail. So part of your culture has to be the difference in understanding of how this computer works. Part of caveman culture is, these two plants look alike. This one is good to eat. This one will kill you, right? That's part of what we need. Okay, if you accept that culture is a component that has to be produced, and you accept the Marxist assumption that the key difference in society is who owns the means of production and who does not, then those who own the means of production also own the means of cultural production, right? And so the religion we get, the culture we get, the beliefs we get, all support the system, because that's what they're going to produce. I mean, obviously, right? They're not going to produce they're not going to produce and reproduce a culture that's undermining the belief in the system. That's just silly. It's not the way it works. Okay. Yeah, there we go. All right. So that's a Marxist view. I think I said this a couple of episodes back, but when you think about Marx, you have to think about, for him, economy drives everything. The real foundation of life is economics. That's the foundation. He calls it the superstructure, but all of the culture, ideas, religion, beliefs, any of that stuff is superstructure built on that foundation. And that's the model he's working with here. Okay, now, an elitist view. An elitist view isn't terribly different. An elitist view isn't terribly different, except that an elite view, an elite understanding of stratification means that they're the people. I mean, it's going to echo Marxism. That's why I'm pausing and hesitating here. It's going to echo a Marxist view because culture still is created and owned by large mega corporations. The business schools that get funded, the schools that get funded are the ones that are saying what the people who have money want to say. If I want to start a Marxist school of sociology, and I go, is the Gates Foundation going to give me money? Right? No, not at all. Because I'm saying, right, one of the fundamental things would be that what they're doing is wrong. But when it comes to something like Singularity University, a whole university built around science and technology, exploring future tech, well, then these like big tech companies line up and give money to it, right? So the ideology that comes out of that kind of a university is going to echo the people that give it money, right? So it's not exactly like a Marxist view, but it's close enough. And then the functionalist nature, the functionalist ideology, again, it echoes, doesn't it? So stratification is inevitable, obviously, according to the functionalist one. And in our system, the people who are the best leaders are the ones who have those skills and talents, who fight their way to the top and end up in leadership. The people who are the best at what they do are going to end up in leadership. The people who are good at what they do are going to end up in the right kind of job and go to where they are. Functionalist theory is largely based on, if you understand free market economics, free market theory, then functionalist theory is very similar. People are going to find out what they like to do, what they're good at, what the world will pay them for, and they'll find a spot there. And the best ones will go the farthest. And so leadership will be the people who have risen to the top through all of that. Yeah, it's kind of like free market, I guess, is a good enough way to put it. Okay, here's the kicker, and this is again, this is part of that metacognitive thing. So, how do we actually know if my beliefs are match up with reality, right? And that ends up really, really hard, because part of why I have my beliefs is because I believe I have seen empirical evidence of my beliefs. But it's entirely possible that I'm wrong, right? And how do I actually know if I'm wrong? If you go back and you reread that metacognitive post that I put in there, the whole post is really, okay, here's what I think. Am I sure about that? How do I know? Where did I get my information? How certain am I on that? How could that be wrong? correct? And that's what's going to go on here. So I believe the world works this way. I exist in the world acting on those beliefs. That gets me through. But as one person out of 300 million, there's actually quite a bit of room to be wrong about how I think things work, and I may not actually be correct. So in the last episode, I talked about how much mobility different systems have, and for it's one of the things that liberals and conservatives debate. Here's our system. It has a certain mobility. We could figure out a way to measure it and put a number on it. That's doable. But the left is going to look at that and they're going to see something because they're coming at it with a different set of beliefs. The right's going to look at it and they're going to see something different because they're coming at it with different sorts of beliefs. So what's the reality, right? And how do we cut through our beliefs so that we can get to a closer understanding, a capital T truth of that particular reality? Okay, so again, think metacognitively here. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to understand, not, for the moment at least, not how things work. We want to understand how people think they work. How do Americans think about stratification? So any of these points that are going to follow in the next few slides, they could be 100% correct in what they're talking about. They could be 100% incorrect in what they're talking about. The point isn't whether they're right or wrong. The point is, how are Americans thinking about these things? Okay? Now, the first one is individual achievement. Americans are deeply, deeply individualist. I did it, damn it. I worked hard and I achieved something. And nothing hurts worse than to feel like we got knocked down and it wasn't anything that we could help. I mean, it's nice, at least you don't feel like a failure, but dang, you know, you're working, and then something happens you have no control over. We don't like that feeling of powerlessness. We're Americans. We're deeply individualist. I will say for the moment, however, that as a sociologist, this makes discussing sociology very, very difficult because people are so individualist in their beliefs, they don't want to see structural forces. I've used the metaphor quite a lot, but we're back to the anthill. So you've got an anthill. As a sociologist, we want to study how the anthill works. If you are a psychologist, you want to know how that individual ant works. Part of the problem is, how do I convince ants, as a sociologist studying the anthill, that the anthill actually matters? It's entirely possible that little ant can go well, I guess ants are probably her whole little life and never see enough of the anthill to recognize that the anthill itself is a thing and that the anthill has a certain structure, right? It's a challenge. It's a challenge. There we go. Okay. So a little bit more. So Americans don't mind inequality of outcomes. What they do mind is inequality in opportunity. So if two people start in the same place and one ends up Bill Gates rich and the other one ends up homeless, that's the game we play. We understand that. We're Americans. It's when you start looking at the unfairness of having different opportunities in the first place, that's what really pisses people off. Now, they live with it, just like we mentioned when it comes to education. It makes Americans sad, but they'll live with it. But equality of opportunity is kind of important. It's a belief, but it's a belief we know doesn't actually really work out. Now, the next one, meritocracy and universalism. So universalism means that we all get treated the same no matter who we are. It's why racism pisses us off. It's why It's why sex pisses us off, or rather, gender. You shouldn't be judged because you're a man or a woman. You should be judged based on how well you did whatever the job you were doing was. If your job was to be a parent, did you succeed as a parent? If your job was to be a welder, did you succeed as a welder? And what does that have to do with your sex, right? It shouldn't. We don't like that. Meritocracy, notice meritocracy is merit and ocracy. So you understand merit. Merit is, wow, merit's hard to define. Merit is achievement. We'll go with achievement. And ocracy is the root of ocracy, right? Rule. So meritocracy is rule through achievement. Essentially, you're hoping that you're making promotions based on the fact that you succeeded at something. So you get frustrated if you work really hard and you do as good a job as the next person, but the next person beats you because they're friends with the boss. That's not fair. That's kind of unfairness that will really drive Americans nuts, because we believe in that meritocracy sort of thing. Okay? Yeah. Okay. Now, just as a belief in individualism makes it a little bit hard to teach sociology, because the individualism gets in the way of seeing where structural forces do actually matter and come from. Meritocracy is frustrating to anyone. Well, politically, it's frustrating to the left. Not that it's not good for people to be promoted based on their merits, but because we believe in meritocracy, we're a little bit blind to class consciousness, right? When we see someone who's at the top, our assumption is that they've succeeded and worked their way there. And when we look at the person next to us or below us, we see someone who's really more like competition, or and if they're below us especially, what we see isn't that that we have anything in common with them. We see that they're really a failure. Okay. Politically, for the left, this has been a problem. Again, ever since the 60s and 70s, coming out of World War II, and just as I mentioned in the communism discussion, coming out of the 30s, there was a labor movement in the United States, right? But in order to have a labor movement, you have to recognize that as working people, we share certain interests, right? And we're willing to band together to fight for those interests. But since the decline of all of that stuff in the 70s, we haven't had that at all. If anything, labor's fought amongst itself as the whole thing fell apart. But if you don't go back and look and see that this has been happening, not just since Reagan, but actually before Reagan, you might not recognize that this is an ongoing historical issue or historical thing. It's just it is what it is. Okay, so meritocracy. Now the work ethic. What do you say about the work ethic? The reason I brought this question up in the discussion last week or the week before, the reason I brought it up is because we approach it religiously. And I think I said this about Weber. Weber actually goes through and builds a relationship between the Protestant belief system and the American capitalist work ethic. So it's not even an accident that we Americans believe in the work ethic as if it's religious. One of the most popular financial helpers or planners in at least the Bible Belt here is Dave Ramsey. And what's he telling you to do? He's telling you essentially, he calls his whole system biblically based finance. And when you go through and look at his system, it matches Weber's work ethic point by point by point by point. So we're talking about something that's a couple of hundred years old, that is indeed rooted in religious values that also can help you improve your financial situation. So all these things wrap up together. So it's not surprising people get moral in talking about the work ethic. And so I pulled this section here from page 234. The belief that hard work is the key to success and is the most noble of human activities. Weber talks about how the work ethic is similar to prayer. Social and economic success, in this view, is a result of one's willingness to work hard. That means also failure is a result of a lack of ambition or desire to improve yourself. So if you fail, it's your own damn fault. If you're lazy, you're actually immoral. And if you work really hard, you shall succeed. There's another quote, page 235. Page 235. I love this. So this is coming from another book, but that's okay. So there's a strongly held belief that it cuts across class lines. Quote, people can make money if they put their minds to it and get off their little rear ends. People get lazy, but I have no doubt that I will make out well because I'm very ambitious. So if there's something I want, I'll do it. Okay. How does this not sound like it came directly out of our discussion about what is hard work in the second week, right? Okay. Continuing reading here. We would naturally assume that this is the view of someone occupationally successful and economically secure. But these are the words of an unemployed secretary living below the poverty line. So the person's unemployed, they're a secretary, which, as important as they are, isn't the highest rated in terms of prestige. But this person is living below the poverty line, and this person fully believes in the American work ethic, right? And it's even a little judgy sounding, isn't it? So it's by Hochschild, 1981. Hochschild, I think I put a couple of Hochschild links in. She's the one that did. She's the one that does The Second Shift. But that book came out a little bit later. Which book of hers is this from? I'm brain farting here. A, B, C, D, E, F. Oh, nope, it's a different Hochschild. My apologies. This is not Arlie Hochschild with her books. This is Jennifer Hochschild. And the book is What's Fair? American Beliefs About Distributive Justice. Okay, there we are. And you can find it on page 29. All right. Now, so for the sake of discussion, what is the work ethic as it's understood, and what is Weber getting at? I should have done a page on this. And this is going to sound exactly like Dave Ramsey. So the first thing is, in American work ethic, you work extremely hard. Okay? So you don't just do your job adequately. You don't just do your job adequately. You do your job extra special hard. Weber spends a lot of time talking about how, let's make a page. Work ethic, right? Okay, we should make numbers because it's steps. Number one, work extra hard. All right, so if you're an old-time Calvinist, Weber's original Protestant ethic kind of person, you work all the time, right? Seriously, you work extra hard. Now, he does this kind of this social psychological or even psychological thing about predestination and and the kind of tension that builds in individual people. And we don't need to worry about that today. Just suffice it to recognize that for Weber, the work ethic means psychologically these people are driven. The Protestant ethic means these people are driven to work far more than they quote unquote need to. If you go and you listen to something like Dave Ramsey, he's going to tell you if you have debt problems, you don't get free time, right? If you have free time, you can get a second job, right? So if you have debt problems, you need to be driving pizza in the evenings, or getting some sort of second job so that you can save up enough money to pay off your short-term debt problems. You have to work extra hard. You don't work and then go home and relax. You work and then maybe you eat and then you go back to work, right? So work extra hard. And number two, what's number two? Enjoy. Asceticism. All right. So number two, you don't enjoy the fruits of your labor. So if you're working a job and a half, or if you're working two jobs, you're going to make a certain amount of extra money. If you go spend that money, I'm not going to say you wasted your time, but you worked all that time, and then the benefit is gone, right? So let's actually start with Weber on this point. So one of the things Weber is going to point out is there's a key line in the Bible. The Amish use it so that they don't have cars and carbon fiber bicycles. But it's the unequally yoked line. So that the Amish won't have modern technology, because then they're too much like us. They're unequally yoked with us. Further, there's a sense in much of religious thinking that you shouldn't be too hedonistic, right? That's being too worldly. Enjoying the pleasures of this world can lead you astray, right? So if you are religious and your work is what you do, if you're religious and your work is what you do to serve God, right, then you don't stop working and go be hedonistic. That undoes all the work of God you did. You don't enjoy what you were doing, right? You turn around and go back to work, right? Okay. There's an element I left out here. Let's put it right here. All right, and then okay. It doesn't matter that they're out of. It doesn't matter that they're out of order. Okay, so I'll continue talking about number three, and then we'll hit number two. So if you're a religious person, you don't want to be hedonistic. You don't want to enjoy the good things of this life, because that leads you astray. And so consequently, if you have a lot of money and you are religious, then you really shouldn't be spending that money on hedonistic worldly things, right? Okay, in terms of Dave Ramsey style financial advice, what's he going to tell you? I think one of my favorites is, I'm going to live like no one else, so later on I can live like no one else. So I'm not going to take my money now and buy a car I can afford. I'm going to buy a car that's cheaper than what I can afford, so some of that money can go do something else, right? I'm not going to spend all my money. I'm going to save some, right? I could afford to be comfortable to here with my money, or I could, be less comfortable and take this money and do something else with it. So in a religious sense, you need to be ascetic, don't enjoy the fruits of your labor. In a financial sense, you are going to take that money and you're going to spend it somewhere else, right? You're not going to spend it on luxury things. You're going to save it. What are you going to do? You're going to actually reinvest. Now, here's the kicker. It doesn't matter if you're religious. If you're religious and you're reinvesting, what are you going to reinvest in? You're going to reinvest in your work, right? You're going to reinvest in something that's going to make you more money because, right, that's what you're supposed to do. If you want to get rich, you're going to take that money, you're going to reinvest. You're going to put that money into something that you think is going to be productive and make you a little bit more money as you're going on. So let's go back up to number 2, because that actually goes along with the work extra hard. So if you have to work extra hard, that's fine. And perhaps number 2 should be bundled in with number 1. I'm not really sure. But in one of the key differences between Protestantism and Catholicism coming after the Lutheran coming after Luther, we'll just say that. One of the important things there is that for Luther, in Catholicism, before the Protestant Reformation, there was a sense that the clergy were closer to God. And so us laity, those of us who weren't clergy, were a little bit down the ladder. So the clergy is much closer. You know, obviously they're going to go to heaven. They're going to be saved. The rest of us, though, we're a little bit farther down. And in that world of Catholicism, if you wanted to read the Bible, it had to be the priest read it, and then they told you what the Bible said. It wasn't printed in your language, and even if it was, you weren't really invited to read it. The Mass certainly wasn't going to be in your language. It was going to be in Latin. So your entire experience of your religion is filtered through the clergy. So the clergy is better than you, right? And of course, with the Protestant Reformation, the clergy got demoted, or rather, the laity got promoted. Now the clergy is just kind of an advisor, but the clergy is not better than you. They're not more likely to be saved. They're not automatically going to heaven. And as part of that promotion, what you do for a living becomes the work of God, right? In this world, the clergy are clearly doing the work of God because they're running the church, right? In a world where the clergy are pushed aside and the laity is promoted, then the laity is all of a sudden doing the work of God. And this is, you can hear echoes of this in all of the language about God's plan, right? If God is involved in the world, running things on a daily basis, then someone still needs to take out the trash. And so it's God's plan that somebody should be a garbage man, right? Now, the awesome part about this is at least we give garbage men at least we give them the respect of doing important work, perhaps even godly work, right? So in that sense, it's a little bit awesome, right? So you're not just whatever you do, doing what you do, you are actually fulfilling God's role for you. You're doing God's work. That's just less of an idea in Catholicism. But for what it matters here is if you're just working and working extra hard, but you're not in that role that God wants you to do, you're not going to be happy, you're not going to be successful, you're not going to be whatever. So not only do you work all the time, and work very hard, but you take that work and you do it in what God wants you to do, right? In God's work. Now notice how notice how much harder you're even going to work, right? Because now it's not just that you're working hard because it's kind of like a form of prayer or a way of honoring God. You're working extra hard in God's work, right? Which makes it it It's really important. So if you again, if we take that to kind of a Dave Ramsey approach, if you listen to his radio shows, what's he going to tell you? He's going to tell you to work extra hard, get a second job if you need to, but he's also going to tell you to start moving towards making more money, right? And one of the books that he pimps on that show is 48 Days to the Work You Love, right? He wants you to find God's work for you. He won't use that language because he has too broad of an audience, but he wants you to find your vocation. He wants you to find whatever the work God thinks you should be doing is. And if you can find the work, your work, then you're going to be making, because it's your work, you're going to be making enough money to get by. It's going to be easier to make the money you need. And it's going to imbue the work you do with a certain amount of dignity. All right? If you want to think about it from a capitalist perspective, you don't just work extra hard, but you work extra hard at what you're rewarded the most for, right? So you find the thing that's making you the most money, and you direct your work into that, right? Okay, so you work for work's sake, but not only, that's number one, not only do you work for work's sake, but you find the most rewarding work for you, right? Number three, you don't take the money from that and buy a nice TV and a cool computer and a decent car. You make do with your old tube TV, your 5-year-old laptop that you got off of Craigslist, and your $2,000 car, right? Might be nicer to have nicer things, but you need to take that money and put it in a bank account. And actually, hopefully, if you can build that bank account, invest it either in a business or in the stock market or whatever, because you need to actually start making that capital, turning that income into capital that'll work for you. All right. Now, that's the Protestant work ethic, the way Weber says it. Let's put this in here. Weber's work ethic. All right. Now, this takes just a little bit of a diversion here for a moment. But when you think about the work ethic, this is so deeply ingrained in American psyche and American culture that this is our answer to everything, right? So if you're fat and overweight, and you ask a stranger, well, you would ask a stranger this, I don't know. But if you're fat and overweight, and you want to fix that, the common response from the people around you is going to be some version of the work ethic, right? So you got to work extra hard. You got to pick up an exercise plan, right? Now, I don't think there's any exercise as vocation unless you happen to be that beautiful, scary trainer on Biggest Loser. But that really would be working out as a vocation. But you really got to commit to it, and it might take more than a half an hour a day to do it. You're not supposed to enjoy things in life. You can't be hedonistic. So you better give up those tasty things like Twinkies and pizza and beer, because those are worldly, right? Well, and because those are carb-laden and will make you fat. And then as you get fitter, you can actually work out a little bit harder and a little bit faster, right? But that work extra hard in terms of working out, suffer. It's not working out if you're not hurting. And then putting off enjoyment of things. That's that number three. That's everybody's response to, what's your problem? Why are you so fat? And when you listen to people talk about why people are fat, they'll talk about it in moral terms, right? They're gluttonous. They enjoy their stuff too much, or they're lazy. They don't actually work out. The beautiful thing here is, what if obesity is a science problem, right? That's completely off the table. Why are people obese now, but not for 200,000 years of human history, right? Well, that would suggest that there's a science problem part of it, but we're not going to be bothered with that. We recognize it's a work ethic problem. You work extra hard, you deny yourself, and as you start to lose weight because you're working extra hard and denying yourself, you're going to be able to work that much harder, right? Think about it in terms of cycling. You take up cycling, and it's hard to go 5 miles. You lose 20 pounds, you gain some strength. Now all of a sudden, you can go 10 miles, right? You lose 40 pounds, and you're in pretty good shape. And your legs are pretty strong. All of a sudden, instead of going 5 or 10, you're doing 50s. Well, it's not all of a sudden. It's because you made a little bit of progress here and reinvested it, and now you're able to achieve something. Okay. Even the way we talk about the environment fits this Weber's work ethic. Again, a problem that may well be a science problem, but one that people respond to with this Protestant ethic structure, right? So the first thing is, in terms of the work extra hard, we need to, in terms of working extra hard, we need to be able to afford the more expensive environmental stuff. Often environmental products cost a little bit of extra money, but that's okay. There's a certain amount of sacrifice there, and there's also a certain amount of sense that you need to work to achieve that, right? The second part is there's a denial or an asceticism to it. I love if you lurk around environmental websites and read their forums, you get this beautiful, this very hilarious kind of picture where these guys try and out-suffer each other. Well, I don't turn my heat on in the winter. When I turn it on, I keep it at 70, and they're comparing it to someone who kept it at 72. And then along comes this guy who says, "Bah, 70 sucks. I keep mine at 65." And then here comes the next guy who's like, "You weenies, I just wear my winter clothes indoors, and I don't turn on my heat at all." Okay, well that's great. They're out suffering each other. They're hitting number 3 perfectly well. But you know, if you actually insulated your house properly and got yourself an efficiency furnace, you could actually be wandering around in your shorts all day and spending less money because you approach it as a science problem instead of as a moral problem. The same thing in the summer. We're going to suffer. We're not going to turn on the air conditioning until it gets to 95 outside. I don't know about you, but I like air conditioning. It's a little bit warm doing lectures in the garage here today. And it's great. You know, part of that suffering and that work extra hard. I'm not going to drive to work because that's so wasteful of Middle Eastern gasoline and burning carbon and pumping it up into the air. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ride my bike to work. I'm going to walk to work. I'm going to suffer by riding the bus to work. That's suffering. But you get the idea. And even the language we use, we're going to save the environment. And when you hang out with the really hardcore environmentalists, you'll notice there's a sense of original sin there too. Just by existing, we humans are exploiting the environment. Okay, I just wanted to throw those two on there to illustrate how we Americans try and solve everything with the work ethic. So the work ethic thing, and this is that metacognitive point, it's not just that, yes, if you work out a lot and eat less and suffer some, you're going to lose weight. Sure, that might work. It's not just that if you get a second job and then don't blow all your money being stupid, you're going to have a little bit more money in the bank. I mean, obviously that's true. More importantly is, how do we think about it? How do I think about it? And then how do I analyze how I think about it? That's the meta part. Okay. Oh my God. Shut the hell up, man. You talk too long. All right. So we'll talk about liberal capitalism, and then the rest should go pretty quickly. So the book is talking about liberal capitalism as well, I guess it's liberal capitalism, right? Liberalism, capitalism, but it's the political and economic It's the combination of liberal political systems and capitalist economic systems. So classic liberalism really is not related to modern liberals in the blue state democratic voting sense. Classic liberalism is the political push through, I don't know, last 300, 400, 500 years. Might have to study it a little bit deeper, but it goes back a very long time. That's moving the locus of control over people's lives to themselves, right? So in a slave system, you don't have any control over yourself. It's not a liberal system. In a feudal system, you don't have that much control over yourself. I mean, you've obviously got a lot more than slaves, but you know, the feudal lord has so much political power over you. It's hard to, you're not free in the American sense. So as we move along, all of our religious systems, all of our political systems have moved towards the freedom of the individual to determine his or her life, right? That's classic liberalism. And yeah, and that's obviously, I mean, I guess that's my politics, but obviously that seems like a good thing. I don't want to go back to feudal Ireland. I think that would be terrible. Okay, now capitalism. Capitalism is, we all understand what capitalism is. It's you own your own private property, and that property can be used as means of production. And so consequently, in owning that, in having that private property, you're free to do with it what you want, right? And ideally, if you're a good capitalist, you want to use that property to make you a little bit of money, and then you're going to reinvest that money so that now you've got more property, and that more property can make you more money. You get the idea. Okay. Americans believe in liberal capitalism kind of the way a fish believes in water. If they've never thought about water, a fish isn't going to recognize water. If they do start thinking about water, they're going to recognize that it's fundamental to how they understand things, right? To the point where they may think that there's no other way they can live. Well, now, for a fish, there really is no other way to live. But for humans, there's all varieties of political and economic systems. This is just one. It's one that works for us, but it's also one that we believe in, almost as if it's religious. Now, remember when I was hesitating a few pages back talking about functionalism. So part of what's going on with liberal capitalism is that we have a faith that that system works well. So I have here, it's built on a belief that free markets select out the best ideas, products, and people through competition. This is an article of faith. When Adam Smith is talking about the invisible hand of the market, making sure a system works as well as it can, you recognize there's a tremendous amount of faith there. Says who? Why do we think this? Is this a thing that can be proven? It's almost like God's up there making it work out, right? It's that invisible hand. Even if that's true, even if it's true, it's kind of amazing that markets work that way. And when you combine classic liberalism and democratic voting and all of that, and then this free hand of the market system, you can see that there's an idea that what we end up with is the best system that most of us agreed upon, and it beat out all of these other inferior systems and ideas and whatever else. Again, I'm not saying that this isn't how it works. I'm not saying it is how it works. I'm saying this is a belief component to how we think it works. Okay? I wonder what the people walking by think. I'm hearing, talking to myself in the garage. All right. The ancillary beliefs. I don't know. I don't want to say too much about these. But the ancillary beliefs, the book talks about the idea that human nature doesn't change. The book's got a little bit of a political agenda to it. I would go so that they're like, well, if human nature doesn't change, why would we try for something else? That's kind of the book's take on it. I would flip it around just a little bit and say, if you believe in that classic liberalism, or that liberal capitalism that we're talking about, and you believe in free markets, then your fundamental assumptions about human nature are that humans are selfish, that they're rational, that they're going to work towards their own best interest, and hopefully look out for their families. Those are the way humans in our system should, at least theoretically, be understanding the world. That's kind of the human nature of the people that we are used to dealing with. But that's not human nature in every system that ever was. And if some other system evolves in the future, that's not necessarily how human nature is going to be there. The neutrality of social systems, essentially what they're saying there is we tend to think that that the social systems, the economy, the political system we have are neutral, and we're just, they're setting up the rules of the game and we're playing within those rules. And in fact, simply putting in rules favors the game going this way or that way. If you want to think of it in terms of sports, let's think about it in sports that are running. If you look at marathoners, they've got a certain body type. They're very, very light, 110, 120 pounds. They're at least the ones who win. They're very thin. They're long and wiry. They have a certain kind of body type, right? Now, if you think about sprinters, sprinters are kind of the exact opposite. The people that hold the world records in the 100-meter dash, they look like football players. They got a lot of muscle. And chances are they might be able to train and compete a marathon, but with the body that they have, they'll never, ever, ever win a marathon. And the marathoner, you could take that skinny little dude and have him start lifting weights. He's never going to be a competitive sprinter, right? You've got two different kinds of body styles. Now, when you step in and you say, okay, the game that we're going to play here is a 200-meter dash, and you assume that the athletic contest is neutral, then, of course, what you're doing is you're favoring the sprinter without ever recognizing it, okay? You see the same thing in infrastructure. Depending upon how you lay out your roads, you're actually creating different kinds of societies and favoring and disadvantaging different people within those societies. There's so that the systems we build aren't neutral, right? The systems we build can be used for good or evil, but the mere existence of the systems themselves actually already creates favorites and disadvantages. It's not that there's anything wrong with that. I don't think you can make a system that doesn't do that. It's more along the lines of we have to recognize that if we're going to be fair. Hold on. All right, so I'm back. Okay. The other one, the fear and doubt of other systems. Again, the book's kind of trying to make a political point here. But I do want to say, it's there is a component that Americans have of almost knee-jerk reactionary stuff, knee-jerk reaction to something that's a little bit different, right? So clearly our system is the best, and people that do other systems differently, they're doing it wrong. And especially if you can paint it with something like communism or fascism or anything that we really don't like, then for sure they're doing it wrong. When the fact of the matter is, there are good ways and bad ways to do democracy. There are good ways and bad ways to do capitalism. There are good ways and bad ways to do government intervention in things. And our government intervenes in all sorts of things. I always get sort of a kick out of the welfare discussion because welfare pisses people off. But welfare is like this, little fragment of this whole much larger system where the government involves itself in everything. Similarly, something like the healthcare system, you know, some nations do very good government healthcare. Some nations do rather shaky government healthcare. Some nations have very effective fee-for-service systems. The one thing that's true about our system is it sort of sucks. It's more expensive than everybody else's system, or as expensive as everybody else's system, with a lower result, right? And Obamacare itself is kind of this bastard child that was supposed to appeal to both sides of the political spectrum. I don't know if it's good or if it's bad, but a lot of that comes out of all they have to do is say, "Oh, that's a communist thing, and we're not going to do it," or talk about it being too free market, and then the left isn't going to vote for it. When again, in fact, there's a lot of different ways to do these things. But we have trouble looking at them or taking them seriously because we don't, we're not willing to admit that other folks are doing it well. Okay. So this page, this is the socialization page. Let me get the timer going here. Really, I'm almost done. 5 more minutes. This is the book talks about socialization. So when we're passing on these beliefs, these values in believing how the world works, when we're passing these on to people, how is it that we're actually passing them on? That process is called socialization, and it happens. We teach our children these things. So look at how much of the hard work and education thread was about parents learning these things from children. We teach them in schools so that, we teach them in schools. And perhaps importantly, we also teach, on the second bullet here, legitimation and the incidental socialization. The incidental socialization, in schools at least, that's the hidden curriculum, right? And so a lot of what people learn in school isn't reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's the stuff that's going to help them in the modern world. It's be on time, be respectful to your peers. It's learn that work ethic. It's learn to delay gratification so you can achieve something later on. A whole lot of schooling actually isn't about the content material, but about that hidden curriculum. It teaches you the individualism. It teaches you the competitive component. Remember, going back to that Marxist point at the very beginning, the people that control the means of production also control the means of cultural production. It's not necessarily consciously planned that the school system teaches exactly the values that we need out of our workforce, except I think it might actually be consciously planned. But from Marx's perspective, no other cultural system would come out of the economic system we have. Okay, now that leads to the mass media and legitimation. Now, as it says, this chapter is a little bit dated because this book is on the 6th edition. I've used it for probably the last 5 or 10 years. And in the last 5 years, so I've used it at least 10 years. I don't know what the first imprint on it is. But in the last 5 years, the alternative media and social media have completely exploded so that the media system today is different than it was in the past. And in the past, yes, there was a certain amount of propagandistic shaping that happened and was perhaps inevitable. But in today's world, what's driving the media is sort of our outrage politics or clickbait media, if you will. That's why the second point is, doesn't mean we live in a value or ideology neutral media world. In fact, what happens now is the values are explicit, and we choose only the stuff that reinforces our values. It's not good for us. It doesn't make us smarter. If anything, it allows us to live in a cocoon that's ignorant of other people and other situations in the world. But well, yeah, and it's based on, like I said, outrage politics. So for instance, you take Fox News. Everyone knows Fox News is a certain flavor of conservative. It's okay. It's who they are. It's what they do. But if you're watching Fox News, you know you're going to get a certain kind of spin. And if you watch Fox News, it's probably because you want that kind of spin. Fox News knows this, so they provide that kind of spin so that they can hold on to the market that they have. If all of a sudden they start doing, super liberal stories, they're going to lose viewers very, very quickly because they're off their brand. What this means is that the only thing you can really trust when you're watching Fox News is trust that you're getting conservatively flavored news. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just the way it is. Same thing happens with, take NPR, National Professor Radio. All the professors and the liberals listen to NPR. They like things like gay marriage, so NPR carries all sorts of news about whether or not gay marriage is legislation is moving through the courts or not. They do this not because they're lying, not because they're trying to do bad news, but because, in fact, the people that give them donations, this is the stuff they want their news to consist of. They want these updates. And if they start doing news that's flavored like Fox News, they're going to lose their donors, right? So they are responding to their market, paying for the news or promoting the kind of news that their market is telling them that they want. But if you're watching NPR and not Fox, the stuff that conservatives care about isn't going to be on your radar, right? So if anything, instead of the rise of alternative media and social media platforms to promulgate that media, instead of that making us smarter because it gives us more choices, what it's done is give us more biased choices. So if anything, if we choose to, we now live in a world that's even more insular. So that's a little bit part of the problem with media in general. When it comes to legitimating our values and how we understand the world works, you can recognize that Fox News is never going to carry something that's really pro-labor or talking about the structural problems of poverty. If anything, Fox's shtick is to make fun of the structural problems of poverty. And NPR, they're going to talk about the structural problems of poverty, and they're not going to spend a ton of time talking about how the individuals involved may or may not have contributed to their own misery. Okay. That was a little bit long, but it was important. So thank you. Once again, comments, question, reaction, rebuttal, editorial reply. Put it in the forums, and we'll talk about it. All right.